Hello, it's Amy Zewe with the Friday Red Alert Jerusalem Connection Report for September 23rd. BDS, illogical and inconsistent. BDS stands for Boycott, Divest, and Sanction, particularly the nation of Israel and by extension Jewish people worldwide. This is done with the guise of trying to help so-called oppressed Palestinians in the Middle East, in particular in Israel or the Israeli territories. Notably, these groups call the Israelis in the West Bank and Judea and Samaria occupiers and indicate that the Palestinian people are oppressed under that regime. Where the facts do not line up with this, even by the very mouths of the Palestinians that live there, this is their narrative, and they take it to college campuses worldwide. In that, Brit Hume has a new installation of the On the Record show at 7 p.m. on the Fox News Network, and it is called Campus Craziness. Mr. Hume has taken over this program from Greta Van Susteren, also a great friend of Israel. Now, Mr. Hume has put out a blanket statement worldwide, since this is an international show broadcasted around the world, for people to send in stories about issues on college campuses that seem inconsistent with the nature of higher learning, freedom of expression, just the idea of truth-seeking, critical thinking, and developing good citizens to go into the world. In this Campus Craziness segment, he occasionally finds issues that address the same thing we do. How the BDS movement is disrupting or discriminating on college campuses. And one such case he brought up the week of September 20th is that the UC Berkeley system, or the UC California at Berkeley School, has designated or created so-called safe spaces for students to engage in a place where they don't have to worry about discussing things that make them feel bad, or that will make them think too hard, or that will somehow make them uncomfortable, that they're not offended in any way, whether they're discussing religion or gender issues or politics, philosophy. These particular safe spaces, however, have particularly shunned the Jewish students on campus, and that's what makes it ironic. Jewish students have reported that they were told to not be in these spaces or engage in their use because inherent in their Jewishness is their apartheid nature or their oppressive nature because of what Israel does, or they say it does, in the Middle East. So that is outright discrimination at the very least, and it is anti-Semitic at worst because it is blanket statements against these particular students for so-called perceived ills of a nation that is on the other side of the world. So I'm not sure how safe it is, and it certainly isn't very inclusive. Thank you, Mr. Hume, for labeling this craziness and letting the world know that this illogical and not making too much sense position is going on at UC Berkeley. In other college news, the BDS movement also doesn't seem to identify oppressive events that happen to their brethren in Palestine with any true discourse. For example, a professor in the Palestinian territories named Mohammed Dajani Dowdy has been receiving death threats and outright hostility for having taken a group of Palestinian college students to Auschwitz to learn about the realities of World War II and the Holocaust in an effort to bring the competing narratives of Israel and Palestinian students to some sort of exposure. Professor Dowdy has noted publicly that the Holocaust and many of the events and facts of World War II and the history of the Jewish people in Europe is completely omitted from Palestinian curriculums, including curriculums funded and developed by the UN, which of course is funded by Western Europe and mostly America. So we have Palestinian students going through their entire school career into the university level, never knowing the realities of World War II and the truth about what happened. If and when the Holocaust is mentioned at all, it is either noted as a lie or over-exaggerated, or not necessarily targeting Jewish people, but somehow dissidents in the European lands during World War II. So with this lack of facts that the Palestinian students are armed with as they go through school, of course they then have continuing hostilities with their neighbors, the Israelis, because they don't understand why they're there. So the professor decided to plan this trip to Auschwitz to start to engage a learning curve where the competing narratives can at least be recognized and studied, and hopefully enlighten why the Israeli people are there and why the nation was created in 1948. Now, upon his return, newspapers in his area went crazy. They called him a propagandist and even a traitor, and noted that the trip was funded by Israel, which in fact it was not. Funding was through a German university in a hopes to bridge a learning gap that the Palestinian students have. Now, what my curiosity is, if the Students for Justice in Palestine, a major proponent of the BDS actions in Europe and in America, are so concerned about Palestinian rights, their Palestinian brethren being able to have freedom of expression, freedom of travel, freedom of movement, freedom to study, why they haven't in any way on their radar put a blip about this event that happened in these territories, or the fact that their curriculums that are used in these schools are incomplete and often filled with lies, at least in regards to World War II and the centuries that led up to it, and the Jewish presence in both the Middle Eastern lands and in Europe. So, BDS, illogical and inconsistent, globally so. Shavua Tov, have a great week. Shabbat Shalom.